It's very, very clear that I came here for a purpose. And when I deviate from that, things get difficult. And when I'm in alignment to that, things fall into place easy and good things really happen. And so I actually almost think, like, if you play that out, I almost think it's damn near impossible to have the maximum impact if you're not in alignment with your soul.
Welcome to the Soulful Impact podcast. I'm your host, Brooks Barron. Today, my guest is my friend Scott Britton. Scott was the co-founder of Troops, a successful tech startup sold to Salesforce in 2022. He's now the author of a popular online newsletter called Consciousness, the Doorway to Human Evolution, and the host of the Evolution FM podcast. Scott's deeper story is that while he was finding traditional success with his startup, he was also going through a process of spiritual awakening that, in his own words, sometimes felt like a living hell.
In all these parts of my life, everything that I was holding on to was getting ripped away. And it was as if the divine intelligence was lesson by lesson teaching me to let go by making my life a fucking living hell.
Since coming through that awakening journey, Scott has committed himself to helping other high-achieving entrepreneurial folks like himself find the synergy between their calling towards spiritual growth and their desire to build and achieve practical things in modern-day life. Scott and I discuss in practical terms how to actually connect with and be guided by our souls. We also discuss why it might be more important to do that now more than ever. And we explore how to create a resonant connection with soul that's characterized by personal empowerment and unconditional love.
I think it's why what we're talking about is more valuable than ever. There's more information created, there's more manipulation, there's the proliferation of content with AI. It's like, how do you navigate? What do you trust? Like, where's your compass? And to me, that inner compass and developing a relationship with it and strengthening it is truly what is needed to help many people during this time.
Another favorite part of this conversation for me was digging in with Scott around his idea of impact.
I think when we think about solving the problems that the world has, it's because of ignorance. It's a consciousness problem. And so to shift the consciousness, which is the most, to me, core fundamental input to everything, you have to shift your own consciousness. I think, like, in the simplest form, like, the biggest impact I can have is to uplift myself.
Last but not least, Scott closes out this episode with some profound and practical advice around how to navigate some of the more challenging aspects of the spiritual journey, such as dark nights of the soul, learning to let go, and surrendering into trust. Please enjoy this episode with Scott Britton. Before we begin today's episode, I have a brief invitation. If the content of this show resonates with you and you'd like to dive a little deeper, we'd love to invite you to come check out our work at Soulful Impact. All of our offerings, from our online workshops to our deep dive wilderness-based Vision Quest program, are all designed to support you in coming more fully alive, in inhabiting more fully the deepest truth of who you really are, so that you can create authentic, aligned, and regenerative impact. Learn more and reach out anytime at soulfulimpact.co. Scott Britton, welcome to the Soulful Impact podcast, my friend.
Brooks, it's an honor to be here, dude. I love the whole, just like vision and message you're putting out into the world with Soulful Impact. And I love our conversation. So I couldn't be more excited to be here.
Thank you so much, brother. Yeah, you've played a key role in facilitating my journey and the journey of Soulful Impact, whether you realize it or not. So excited to have you here too, and excited to explore together. One reason I'm particularly excited to have this conversation is I think you're probably one of the more well-read people that I know when it comes to the field of consciousness and spirituality. And then I also know that you have a lot of direct experience with this terrain yourself. So I'm just really stoked to dig into all of that with you and see where we go. And so I'd like to start with the big picture question of what does soul mean to you? And how do you relate to the idea of soul in your everyday life?
Ooh, juicy. So for me, soul in the most basic form is like the divine eternal part of our being. And so I am a believer in reincarnation and that this is just one of many lifetimes and journeys as a human, and probably a whole lot of other things that I don't even, I can't even conceive of. And yeah, that kind of like energetic composite of information and experience and the awareness that comes with that is something I think that persists. And so, I think like this lifetime is just a continuation of the soul's experience in this present form. And for me, how I relate to that on a daily basis is I feel like you can basically kind of gain direct access to that part of your being. And it's a huge part of the tradition that I've focused my studies on called Ren Shui, where they have this notion of Shen. Shen in Chinese means true self. It also means God, funny enough. Um, and basically the idea is that, you have this ecosystem in your consciousness where you have the consciousness, which is, what you're aware of. You have the energetic heart, which is kind of what creates feelings. And then you have your Shen, which is your true self. And early in your life, basically, those things are all unified and they're all one. And so there is no separation from your soul. And as you go through life and you have all these big T and little t traumas and all this conditioning and all these things, basically, you start to just develop patterns. And the basically the the soul, the Shen, gets disintermediated. It's almost like there's a redundancy of all these patterned ways of intaking the outside world and then using that to respond and then identifying with that. And so you kind of just lose the connection. And that connection is also um facilitated when the energetic heart is open. So the for me, a huge part of my journey has just been basically kind of bringing those different components back into union so that the soul is available to access on demand, but also a more dominant contributor to my awareness. And so, dude, I mean, it's like I don't really make a decision without consulting that inner wisdom. Like a big decision, like I'll go decide what I want for breakfast. But I when it's like, hey, should I go to this event or should I do this thing or should I do that? Or, I'll drop in and ask. And I also have feel like that the soul, when there's enough recognition of what that sound, like the texture of it, it's like a texture thing where it's like when you listen to the radio over and over again, you familiarize yourself with the voices of different artists, and when you hear a song, you're like, oh, that's Shakira. The same thing happens in my experience with the soul and other contributors to your awareness, where you start to really recognize how that comes through. And so many times, when I am going to go to eat breakfast or something else, I actually will hear like, hey, like don't probably should eat something else. Or things like that. And so you start to kind of just become really in tune with that inner wisdom, and whether it's spontaneous or on demand. And I don't really think there's a more trustworthy source of information.
Wow, I really love that answer, and in particular the metaphor of the artist on the radio. I think that's a question that I often get from people is like, well, how do I know what's the voice of my soul or versus the voice of my ego? And I'd love to hear you share more about sort of how you developed that awareness over time. Obviously, part of it is just, like you said, kind of repetitions, right? Like practice. But what's been in particular helpful for you in terms of making contact with your soul originally and then learning to really notice it and hear it in a day-to-day sense?
Yeah. So definitely the first contact was when I did plant medicine. For the first time when I did ayahuasca, it was just a very profound experience where I was like, I'm aware of this presence that I know is not my thoughts. And it seems to know everything. It seems to basically be omnipotent. And it also seems to be incredibly loving. And I had no idea what that was. And, after I had made that first contact, I was really excited about how to figure out a way to stabilize that connection. Um, and so, that was really my goal was to, with spirituality was just to like, I was in a pretty shitty place in life, but to really have that divine connection just be a part of my daily experience. And the first time, the way that it started to emerge more regularly was through this practice that my teacher taught me. And in Ren Shui, it's called Ling Yuan. And the method is it's a transformational modality that's very similar. It follows like the same pattern of like a lot of these, where basically it's like you become aware of something, subconscious or just like you were triggered or something, and you accept it and you open to it, and then you essentially replace it with more supportive information and feel what that feels like. Um, and originally, that was a very consciously coerced process where it was like, oh, I accept that I'm doubting, feel what that doubt feels like. Okay. And then I'm going to replace it with trust. And at a certain point, the replacement information started to just come through automatically. And so there was there was this recognition of, whoa, like I didn't need to think of anything or feel anything. It just emerged. And that I was instructed that like, the information is coming from your higher self. And so I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I had also been practicing Advaita Vedanta, where it's the kind of who am I, and you ask the question and you see there's nothing there, and that's the whole point. You do that over and over again. And that process made me very good at kind of posing questions and then waiting. And so kind of like getting accustomed to the working with emergent information, I would call it, where you're like learning to ask things and not leap and to just sit there and just see what arises. And as the as I continued down that path of working with my teacher and working with like allowing the replacement in this exercise to increasingly be something that was spontaneous and emergent, and also working with Advaita Vedanta, I was instructed that to just start experimenting with asking questions to the stillness. And I started to do that, and I started to just really feel like I had a pretty increasingly strong contact with that inner wisdom.
Yeah.
And it felt like a cheat code. I felt like it was like, whoa, this is amazing. This
Yeah.
is so cool. And, funny enough, I was like so passionate about it that I thought, I was like, wow, like intuition is really just a connection with your soul. Everyone needs to know about this. Um, how come no one's talking about this? So I actually taught a course on intuition called Guided, and I had like 60 people go through this thing, and I learned a lot about that. And one of the things I learned is that people have, first off, the information comes through in different ways for different people. Like for me, it is very audible. It's like a straight up voice. And a lot of times that voice is accompanied by um, imagery, especially in the sense of memory. Sometimes you just know things. Sometimes it's all simultaneously. But I learned that, and then I also learned that there's just an immense amount of purification that needs to happen for that to really come to someone's experience. And so, what I would advise people to who are interested in kind of strengthening that connection is to work on creating the conditions for it to emerge. And that to me is, dealing with all of the subconscious material, the trauma, the patterns, the things that close your heart, like all of these things that basically obstruct that connection. And then as that connection starts to emerge organically in within a transformational modality or something else, maybe something else, then you can start to intentionally experiment with it to essentially build trust and confidence. And so, I think it's like there's like to me, there's really like three phases of it. The first is like establishing the connection and experiencing it. And then there's like differentiation, which is like understanding the texture of it. And then there's trusting it, which is the implementation of that information. And the trust part is it's not an overnight thing. It's like a progressive experimentation where you get some information or you get something and then you put it into action in your life and you see what happens. And then you do it a little bit riskier and then you do it a little riskier. And for me, the key turning point was um in my life was when I first moved to Austin. I was looking at houses and I was basically decided after living in New York City forever and just building no equity and spending all this money on rent, I was like, I'm going to buy a house. And I ended up seeing like 10 houses in 2 days. This was a period of time where things were like flying off the market in like, a day. And it turned out the second house I saw was like the best one by far. And so I put an offer in, and I didn't get it. There was like three or four other offers that were like better than mine. And so I was a backup. And my realtor called me like 3 or 4 weeks later and was like, hey, like, do you want to, that offer fell through. Like, do you want to put an updated offer in? And I was kind of like, you know what? I'm going to just like play around with this, inner wisdom here and see what I should do. And basically, I kind of dropped in at a friend's like Thanksgiving party, and I got basically advice to put in like $10,000 less than what the winning bid was, and my agent had basically said that's not going to win. Like the price
Yeah.
has already been set, like that's
Right.
not going to win. And I was like,
It's not
well,
how
I
the
already
game works.
exactly. Like I
Yeah.
lost the
Yeah.
house. I lost the house anyways. I had already lost the house. So it felt like a
Mm,
very easy thing for me to do. And so I ended up putting in that offer and I ended up getting that house at that price, even though I wasn't the highest bid. And I never found out why that was. But to me, that was a very pivotal moment of like, my true self can see around corners. Like it's not bound by
yeah.
space or time. It knows what's best for me. And I can really start to trust this in major ways.
Yeah.
And After that, I was like, I knew the way that I made decisions and moved through life was never going to be the same.
Oh, I love it. Wow, so much in all of what you just shared that I'm excited to unpack, but just really appreciating that anecdote. And yeah, it's like this kind of interesting combination of releasing control and surrendering and like doing something that the mind says doesn't make any sense or that you just have no idea how it might make sense, but learning to trust it because of how it feels, kind of how it feels maybe in your body, in your energy, and like where it comes from in yourself. It's so cool that you had developed that awareness and could apply it and sort of test it in that way. And I'm appreciating because not only did I think you get the house that you wanted, but you also, in this almost like in some ways, an even better outcome was how much that built trust for you in your inner voice, in your inner wisdom. Like if the inner voice had said, "Oh, put in, 25K higher than the winning bid," and you'd gotten the house, like it wouldn't have necessarily been the same outcome.
Totally, totally. Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, I think like everyone needs that moment where it's like, I trusted this and that made no sense, but it worked out better than I could have ever imagined. And that is like the evidence where it's like, whoa, okay. Um, and I also think it really helps for someone to have, an intellectual understanding of what they're working with. Like one of the things that I really appreciate about the specific lineage that I've studied with is that they acknowledge the soul, the Shen is what they call it, and they tell you all the things it can do. And it's like you are learning about this thing that is supposed to be a normal part of the human experience and just needs to basically be unlocked. And I think it's really tough to get people excited about even going there when they don't really have the intellectual understanding of just like what this like what intuition is, what your soul is, what your it still feels a lot of nebulous in a lot of the ways that I see it discussed.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And it's kind of a tricky double-edged sword, I think, because there's also in particular in our Western culture, there's a lot of very understandable sort of fear or aversion when it comes to uh, spiritual or religious concepts, because I think we have so much experience, so many of us, um, in particular in the West, of having religion or some kind of religious or spiritual belief system forced upon us, or being told like this is the right way and it's either do or die with this way. Like you can't, if you choose one of the other ways, you're going to hell, or um, you know, it's not your place to talk to God. You need to go through me or some other, power figure. Because in my experience, as part of what I'm really enjoying about this podcast is like getting to ask people these questions that I've just asked you and hear like, because soul really is um, it's a universal thing and it's an individual thing. Like we all have. It's important, I think, for us to all to find our own way to it, and at the same time, like we need to find the path that resonates for us. And at the same time, like yeah, we need to sort of have some idea of what's possible, and we need to have some kind of guidance and some kind of awareness of what the heck are we doing here in the first place for it to feel worth it in terms of changing patterns of belief and decision making, et cetera.
Totally. And I do want to double click on that, just the conditioning around this that can be so prohibitive. Like there were lots of periods, like I grew up in a Christian household, went to church. I actually was rebaptized at age 25. Like I went on a dunk tank on, on like a church stage, and like So I was like steeped in Christianity and both Protestant and Catholicism because I had parents that were kind of on both sides, and like there was lots of trepidation I had kind of interacting with that divine part of myself at various points. Like I thought that like, oh, if I don't follow the information, like I might get struck down, like I might like hell might come down on me, or like could I ask it about money? Like because apparently it's like harder to get to heaven. It's harder for a greedy person to get to heaven than like a camel's hair to get through something. Like, there was all this like wrath of God associated around this that like I really had to gradually untangle, and
Yeah.
that was difficult.
Yeah.
I didn't realize
So
how
much
much it was
shame.
there. Yeah.
So
So
much
much
shame in
shame
this.
and so much disempowerment.
Yeah. Something I've spoken about previously on this podcast too is the how helpful it's been for me to come to find Adyashanti's perspective on this topic. And he has a wonderful audiobook called Healing the Core Wound of Unworthiness. And he speaks about the presence of this core wound of unworthiness and shame in our society, and how, in his view, it's much more prevalent in the West than in other parts of the world. And he traces that back to the Judeo-Christian origin stories of how we were sort of rejected by nature and kicked out of the Garden of Eden and kind of branded as flawed, original sin, needing to repent and be redeemed. And so it's this fascinating journey that we seem to be on, in particular in the Judeo-Christian sort of lineage. Um, yeah, my dad comes from Jewish background. My mom comes from Christian background. And I didn't grow up going to church, but I very much grew up, I think, in the zeitgeist of a lot of these ideas, and certainly this idea of uh, being in some way fundamentally flawed and needing to prove myself and make myself good has been a big part of my personal story. So yeah, I'm curious how your relationship with all of that is evolving now. I think you are maybe currently in or have recently been in a process of sort of re-examining your relationship with Christianity, or your kind of perspective on that faith. Because I think I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't want to come off in this episode as like blah, Christianity is bad. Like I definitely don't believe that. I mean to sort of, and I don't think you do either. Like we're pointing out, I think, in a very important dynamic that seems to be preventing a lot of people in our generation and in our society from actually moving forward on this path of self-discovery in these ways that can unlock so much beauty and potential, as you and I have been speaking to. Um, and there's this funny irony that like, so Christianity, and sort of especially when you look at the teachings of Christ himself and sort of what he embodied, is actually so close to universal love, or so, such a pure transmission of universal love. And it's that unconditional love that I think is, in a funny way, is like what I get from the path of soul. From like realizing like, yes, you could ask about money, you can ask about sex, you can ask about whatever it is that you because all parts of you are welcome, because all parts of you are like divinely manifested and here to contribute to your unfolding and the unfolding of your soul's purpose in this lifetime. Like that's the space of, it's like what I like to call an experience of wholeness, like remembering like, oh yeah, I mean, I am innately good. Like everything, I am what I already am what I've been seeking. I don't need to change or redeem myself to be whole. Like, isn't that actually kind of what maybe Christ was meaning.
Well, it's funny. I was like, as I started to look at a lot of my programming and conditioning and how harmful it was for the quality of my life that emanated from my own experience of Christianity, um, I really resented the church. And when I always knew and I maybe had read this, I always knew that Jesus wasn't just a highly enlightened being who um was just like way more evolved than everyone he was around. And but like, I just like really had a tough time reconciling that with all the things that I was taught. And the book that really kind of opened up me back up to, I wouldn't say Christianity, because it's still, I think of it as a religion. I think more just like made me embrace Jesus more as a teacher, was The Wisdom of Jesus, which really looked at a lot of it looked at the history of Christianity. And if you look at the history of Christianity, basically there was this thing that happened a couple hundred years after he died called the Council of Nicaea, where a bunch of Romans just got together and created a remix of all the different scriptures and created a Bible out of it. And so what many of the things that I had experienced and been taught were just like not pure transmissions of the message of Jesus. And um that was like okay, that's interesting, and that also makes sense. I don't think there's all this stuff about hell and killing people and all these things that you would find in the Bible. So I started to look at like what are just the things that Jesus said in the Bible. Like I don't want to look at anything else, like just things Jesus said. And like you could tell that those were very very oriented around unconditional love and just an exemplar of a human who clearly was, just like highly evolved. And what I also found interesting was looking at the texts that were not included in the Bible, like the Gospel of Thomas, Mary Magdalene. Those paint a completely different version of Jesus. They paint him as a teacher of a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, and I would also say that like as you go on your own consciousness journey, you start to realize what they're actually talking about. Things like the kingdom of heaven is within. Like that's essentially it's what we're talking about, is like there's just like all the but that's not, no one's communicating that to you in the traditional, church setting, at least not in the one that I was in. And so it's kind of all started to make sense to me. And one other end note I would or note I would add is that I was watching the book. A movie about the disciples called The Chosen. I don't know if you've watched it. And every single time Jesus came onto the screen and performed a miracle, I just started crying my eyes out. And I was, I just felt like I was kind of getting in touch with his field. I was getting in touch with his energy, and it was just so powerful and loving and emotive that, I have no doubt that he was just an incredibly enlightened being that was here to teach humans. And so I think like Jesus and all of the things that he brought to the world are absolutely amazing. And I just hope that there's more people that can have access to a different perspective of who he was as a man and really what he was trying to teach us than what's been commonly, I guess, to like answer your question in a less roundabout way. I have an immense um respect for, like, I think what the original intention of what Christianity was trying to convey. And for me it's like I want to I think everyone and everything can be your teacher. And so why would I close myself off to Christianity and Jesus and like all these things? Does that mean that like I'm just reading about Jesus all day and the Bible and like that's my path? Like for me, that actually isn't what resonates most, but like I certainly am open and excited to learning what I can from who he was and how he still impacts the world.
Yeah, well, I'm really appreciating the way that you're kind of teasing out the essence and separating the essence quality of like who Jesus was and the energy he brought and actually still brings into the world from the sort of layers of the labelings and the interpretations and the repurposings of it, right, through all these different institutions and people over the centuries. And it actually, in a way, like it actually mirrors, I think, what we were talking about earlier in terms of like getting in touch with the deeper essence of ourselves and connecting with soul and developing the discernment to sort of like sort through like what is that deeper truth and what is the bullshit or just the fluff.
I think it's why what we're talking about is more valuable than ever right
Yeah.
now, because I don't think there's ever been a harder, maybe I could be wrong, but there's more information created, there's more manipulation, there's the proliferation of content with AI. It's like, how do you navigate? It's like you can literally see a video of someone that looks exactly like that person and it sounds like that person and it's not actually that person. And then you have likely people that are trying to amplify it that make it seem like it. So it's kind of like, what do you trust? Like, where's your compass? And to me, that inner compass and developing a relationship with it and strengthening it is truly what is needed to help many people during this time in the world.
Yeah. I love that you brought that in. I was actually just thinking last night, I think, in advance of like kind of thinking about this conversation with you. And I had gotten a series of emails, which I often do. I get so many spam emails that are probably often like sent with AI. Sometimes they even boast about it. They're like, this is something sent with AI. Like, you could do this too. And, we're going to help you grow your business. That's the usual gist of the ones that I get. And I was just kind of laughing to myself. It's like, I just at this point so automatically just like mark them spam. And I'm like, maybe that works for some people. Maybe like AI driven, like cold emailing works to build some businesses. But the way that I'm living, like the path that I'm following, and and I very much like you at this point have like a very clear sense of where my soul's calling is pulling me. And I don't always have like an audible or verbal message sometimes, but for me, it's often more somatic, and I kind of feel the signal in my body, and I feel the change in my energy levels, and I've learned to kind of follow that as the call of my soul. And I was just thinking about like I have no idea what the future growth of my business looks like, but I'm so much more excited and trusting of like connecting with people in the way that I've connected with you, Scott, like the way that we met, through friends a while back and have had these series of conversations that like are definitely contributing to like an expansion of my community around this work and like a proliferation of kind of these ideas and that's already in some ways led directly to for like certain people coming to work with me who are aligned and like again it's like I can't understand it, I can't necessarily predict it, but I've just learned to trust it. Like it's the way that I want to do it. It's the way that actually feels. And it's sort of like, I don't actually care which one is going to make more money or something, like be more successful in that sort of more traditional sense. It's like, what I care about is this is the one that brings me joy. This is the one that just like feels authentic and true. And that kind of brings me to this other topic I've been excited to engage with you on today, which is the idea of impact. And I've been describing soulful impact as this idea that maybe our greatest potential for making positive impact and actually contributing to the world in the way we deep down know and believe and dream that we can has less to do with attachment to specific outcomes or trying to control ourselves and the world to be a certain way. It has much more to do with taking the inward journey of connecting to the deeper truth inside and learning to live from that place and just trust that whatever comes from that place will be our best in any given moment and will lead us over time into the realization of our soul's true purpose.
I agree.
So yeah, and I know you have a background as a tech entrepreneur, and there's a lot of talk in the tech entrepreneurship world about impact, almost to the extent that it's like, yeah, it's a mark of success in some sense. But yeah, tell me about your relationship to the idea of impact and how it has evolved alongside your spiritual journey.
Great question. So I think like high level, you know, the our standards for things are a derivative of our awareness. And so I think about awareness as the ability to see true reality clearly. And by true reality, I mean like the fundamental laws of the universe. And and even in like a metaphysical sense, like many people that I are in my tradition, like they can literally see chi. They can literally hear things that are actually existent that are outside of the normal range of human perception. And so like these elements, these dynamics that are pulling the strings on our experience, like they exist, they have always existed. The thing that is that's different is people's awareness of it. And so like I think about the word impact as it's currently defined is based on the level of awareness of the populace. And for most people that's like, what have you done? Like how many world causes have you changed? How many people have you changed? And it's measured in a very quantitative, like kind of objective way. And I think that that has there's a lot of good intention behind that, and that is one dimension of impact. But the way that my thinking has evolved is there's kind of a metaphysical impact. And the way that I think about that is like we as beings are, essentially energy beings, and we're part of this collective field, and we're like little nodes in the field. And like as we increase our vibration, which is associated to things like unconditional love, things like compassion and truth, and our awareness expands, it's like part of this whole kind of composite of things. Like we are actually lifting up the field. We're lifting up everyone around us. And I think when we think about solving the world, like why are the problems that the world has, it's because of ignorance. It's a consciousness problem. And so to shift the consciousness, which is the most, to me, core fundamental input to everything, you have to shift your own consciousness.
Right.
And so I think like in the simplest form, like the biggest impact I can have is to uplift myself. And when I do that, there's lots of other things that like that expresses externally. And so you know, the external expression of that is like, to me, there's other dimensions of impact that get overlooked. And so like I could be a miserable fucking dude who like has fed 100,000 people. And I actually think that you might be less impactful if you carried yourself with unconditional love and joy and integrity throughout every interaction in your life, and maybe you just were a stay-at-home dad.
You think that would be less impactful or more
Oh, I think it
impactful?
would be more impactful.
More.
Maybe I actually don't know whether it would be less or more, but I think
But
it's
on a certain
I,
dimension,
I
maybe
think
maybe more in a certain way is what I think you're pointing to.
I just think it's a dimension that's overlooked,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because of like we are like the butterfly effect is real. It's like one smile could change someone's entire life. Like what how you impact people around you just like cascades out into like such immense magnitude. So I think that doesn't really get the love that it deserves. And I also think that there is this there is this real truth that there is this experience that I've seen in my life where it's very, very clear that I came here for a purpose. And when I deviate from that, things get difficult. And when I'm in alignment to that, things fall into place easy and good things really happen. And so I actually almost think, like, if you play that out, I almost think it's damn near impossible to have the maximum impact if you're not in alignment with your soul, because reality will not conform in a way that supports you. And so you need to, like, to me, like, this is an example of a law of the universe that doesn't have as much awareness around. And so, like, you need to, the more you can align yourself to your individual, like, mission or law or whatever you want to call it, like, the more impactful you will be. And that is uncovering what that is part of the experience and part of the journey. And you might learn that, like, your impact might just be being, like, learning how to be a, like, unconditionally loving parent or something else. Or maybe it is to found Amazon, right? But, like, that internal integrity and alignment with that is, to me, what matters. And more
Whatever it
than,
is, it's probably not what you think it is.
yeah, more than these, more, I call them like counterfeit benchmarks that our society has created. And I think the word counterfeit to me is like, I was just reading these old lectures of the main teacher of the system I'm in, and he's like, you know, when I go to somebody, like, there's very little correlation between somebody who has a really nice house and really nice cars and, like, a lot of money and maybe even employs a lot of people, and their capacity for unconditional well-being, joy, and love. They're actually not related at all. And we seem to have just, the current stage of humanity's development, I think we've kind of lost the forest from the trees of, like, what really matters. And, frankly, like, as far as I'm concerned, like, unconditional love and and deeper realization is worth, to me, is far more interesting than some vanity metric of, and not to say that helping people is not good, but like some societal measure that we use to measure impact.
Yeah. Well, and I really love what you pointed out just around the experience of actually aligning with your deeper purpose and the way in which, as we do that, the world around us sort of seems to, yeah, conform or conspire in our favor. It's like you start to experience these serendipities or this flow. It's like, actually, yeah, uh, like Joe Hudson likes to use that metaphor of the river, right? And what it's like to just, like, learn to read the current and follow it. You make your little tweaks every here and there with your paddle, but you're not paddling upstream. You're not trying to fight the current to get yourself to a certain place. That's so on point with how I experience this difference too, between being on purpose and being in flow versus uh yeah, chasing one of the mind's ideas, one of our ego's ideas of what we think will make us happy, but is actually probably just a distraction from being present, and often is driven by some shadow or unconscious pattern that we haven't fully integrated yet. That latter option is just so much more exhausting. Like, not only is it less effective and harder, it's like, even if, and that's a story I make up, is like around why so many people who have been so outwardly successful are actually often so miserable, is like because the path of creating all that material wealth or whatever it was involved day after day after day of actually them like overpowering their own deeper truth and forcing something onto themselves from a place of fear, because they were trying to get something that they wanted, um but just, yeah, sort of had a misdirected strategy. And I take a lot of hope in that, in terms of, I also agree with what you said earlier around the consciousness evolution being such a key and important dynamic in this day and age. That's very much my motivation behind Soulful Impact, is because, I'd love to see so many of these dynamics in our world shift, and I'd love to see us evolve and come through this crazy time where there are so many real crises and so much risk and suffering and destabilization, like risk to our species and our planet. Um, and I come back again and again and again to my personal take is just like what you said, that actually maybe our best shot at really building that more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, to quote Charles Eisenstein, yeah, comes through leveling up our own consciousness first.
I completely agree with that.
So let's take a minute to explore, what does that actually often look like as we talk about up-leveling your own consciousness. And we've talked a lot about the benefits of that journey, of which there are many. And it can also be a very destabilizing and scary and harrowing journey. I recall when you and I first connected, and I was sharing a lot of the teachings of Bill Plotkin, who's been a big influence on me and continues to be on me and my work. And you were like, wow, I really relate to this. Like, I really can. You seem to get to have a lot of resonance with some of these ideas, like the descent to soul, or sort of the need for our more adolescent ego identities to disintegrate and fall apart before we can make contact with that deeper truth inside, that deeper essence of ourselves, let alone begin to learn to live from that place. And so, yeah, I'd love to invite you to share a little bit more, if you will, about your own journey. And, there's also this idea of the dark night of the soul, that I think is related. But yeah, how did you mentioned that when you first encountered your soul through that ayahuasca experience, you were having a really tough time in your life. So just share a little bit about how those dynamics have played out in your own path, and sort of what you might encourage or offer to others who might be going through one of those really hard times.
Yeah, I can say that um, this whole journey for me really started with just kind of a deep recognition that like what I was doing and the way I was living like wasn't working. And that was very hard to face because I had thought I had done everything right and I had tried really hard. Like Brooks, you went to Princeton as well. You know what it's like. Like you go to the right school, you get the right jobs, like you do all of the right things and you do them well. And then you start to look around and you're like, why don't I laugh as much as other people? Why don't I feel good if I'm not productive? Why don't I like just enjoy things easily? And yeah, there's just this moment of like, fuck, like I think I got this whole thing wrong. and
Yeah,
yeah,
not a
and
good
so
feeling.
it's a
I've been
really
there.
it's really really brutal. And for me, you know, I've also had a lot of physical issues, like not issues, physical challenges. The whole reason I got started meditating is because I had developed alopecia. I thought I was going to lose all my hair if I didn't become less stressed out. And then, the second time I did ayahuasca, I was like shaking uncontrollably for months and years, and I didn't know what that was about. And so, for me, I was being redirected in ways that I couldn't ignore, and that was really hard. And thankfully, I tried a lot of different things, but like I met a teacher through a coworker of all places who wasn't even described to me as a spiritual teacher, but that's definitely what she is. And that has been really the foundation of helping me be able to move through things. I think it's just,
This was your introduction to Ren Shui.
yeah, I think it's just an incredibly difficult experience to go through alone without support.
Yeah.
And, every single one of our sessions in the beginning would start off with the same question, which is, what are you resisting right now? And basically what I eventually learned is that the biggest discomfort and all of our problems are the fact that we're just resisting things how they are. And the dark night of the soul, of which I've had a lot of that. Like I feel like I pretty much had 2 years where I got this shit completely kicked out of me, and my whole life disassembled. And over and over again, my teacher would tell me that you're in a process and your problem is that you're resisting it. And the more you resist, the more difficult this is going to be. And so as all these
so helpful to have someone tell you that again and again during the process.
It really was.
That's great.
As I just had more and more parts of my life just I'll just be really specific with some examples. Like I lost my dad suddenly in COVID. I got pretty ill. Like I had laryngitis for over 7 months, and I couldn't talk. I had a bunch of things happen with my company where I basically, I know they sound like champagne problems, but like we had this like year and a half long merger and acquisition process where we thought we were going to sell the company like 3 times, and like 3 times like the deal literally blew up the day before, and I got sued like the night before, like money was going to hit my bank. Like this happened like again and again and again. And so like in all these parts of my life, everything that I was holding on to was getting ripped away. And it was as if the divine intelligence was lesson by lesson teaching me to let go by making my life a fucking living hell. And I'm telling you, man, like it was so hard, but looking back, I'm so grateful for it, because the truth is I think a lot of this depends on like what your orientation is going into something like this. Like I was just like completely type A, completely dialed in, like just like controlling everything. And that was the only way that I was going to learn how to let go. It had to be hard for me. And once I really just kind of internalized, once I really internalized that I needed to let go, like I just needed to just like let go, like things got a hell of a lot easier. And but that took a long time because I had just an immense amount of patterns around control. And yeah, man, it's still and there's just increasing layers to this journey. Like I to me it's like Like I feel like I'm in Greece right now, and the first week of this trip, I just got leveled. Like everything around me was going wrong,
Hmm.
and you know, instead of, I think the difference though now is like instead of resisting that, it's just perceived as my next opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, really, really relate to that. Awesome. So as we start to slowly make our way to a close here, I'd love to invite you to share a little bit more about the work that you are doing now, which I see as really amazing and meaningful contribution to creating space and community for conversation around this spiritual journey and what it actually looks like and how to make sense of it and how to find our own way. Yeah, I'd love to give you a chance to just tell the audience a little bit about what you're up to now, and then connect it for us also to all of that dark times and the
Mm.
challenging experiences that you've been through. And if you can connect the dots, how is it true that you're only able to offer the amazing gift that you're offering to the world now because of what you've been through?
Mm. Thank you, brother. Yeah. So what I'm up to these days, my main project is writing a book. It's basically uh, about how to bring your desire to grow spiritually and your desire to, live a modern life and get shit done in the world together so that they work harmoniously. And um, I'm doing a bunch of media stuff where I have a Substack you can check out. You can just search my name on Substack, a podcast called Evolution FM that um, explores the evolution of consciousness. Brooks has been an awesome guest on there, so you can check out his episode. And then I also run a community for entrepreneurs who are on this path called Founder Satsang that's really meant to be a place for people to explore these topics and go on the journey with other people. And yeah, man, what I really feel like my calling is to basically help the people, help uplift people that were in the same position that I was in. And I realized like I went through all the things that I did, um, like starting a company, even being even having that company have a successful outcome so that society would acknowledge some things. That was actually all for the purpose of helping people with this whole consciousness journey. I thought that like starting my tech company and like selling it to Salesforce and all that, I thought that was like the big finish line or whatever. And that was all actually the warm up for the real game. And that experience was basically to help me understand how to translate information to people who have a similar type of disposition that are, probably type A, they're probably working really hard, they probably have perfectionism, they probably have all these things, and they probably need a way to evolve their experience and someone to deliver it in a way that resonates with them. And so all of that was like a preparation for me to be able to contribute that. And yeah, I had no idea about that. But I do feel like I have a very clear understanding of that. And I feel like that understanding, you go through these experiences and these difficulties and you don't know why you're going through it. And when you start to have these experiences where you realize why you needed to go through what you needed to go through so that you could contribute, there's just a level of trust that starts to come in where, yeah, you can't see the totality of things, but I do believe that everything does have a purpose. And I imagine there's a lot of people who are listening to this show who have a difficulty thinking about how whatever they're doing right now is really related to something bigger in their life. And I would just offer a perspective that I actually think whatever you're doing right now is actually perfect for your bigger plan and mission. And the challenge, the real challenge that you have is learning how to trust that, because your real issue is not that in whatever you're doing, it's like how you're relating to it, and the fact that you don't trust it. And so I think just like learning, like just trusting that, and, really making contact with that inner wisdom and all that, like things will start to come clearer and clearer, for, why you've been positioned the way that you are, to help others, and to evolve your own being.
Said like a man who has learned from experience.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Such a fun conversation, my friend, as expected. So you mentioned your Substack. We'll put that in the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to share as far as ways for people to connect with you or to follow your work?
Yeah. Twitter is like probably a good way if you want to like send me it, like you want to like message or something like that. So you can find me on there. And my handle's just my last name, Britton. And yeah, dude, thanks for the opportunity. This was so fun. I just have a tremendous amount of respect for you and love this podcast and the whole mission and vision of Soulful Impact. So it's a real honor to share this time with you.
Thank you so much, brother. It's mutual.
Right on.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. If you, like me, feel passionate about this idea of redefining the way we think about impact to a bit more of a soulful orientation and what that could do for our planet, for our species, for all beings, then please, 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 I'd love to ask for your help. If you could just take a moment to subscribe on whatever platform you receive this podcast and leave, if it feels right to you, a glowing 5-star review. That will do wonders in supporting me in growing this show, attracting more amazing guests, and really bringing this movement, this exploration out into the world. Reviews and subscriptions on YouTube are particularly helpful, and whatever platform that you choose is great. Thank you so much for your time and attention. So glad you joined us here for this conversation today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Last but not least, a reminder that if you're enjoying this show and feel called to take your own journey to the next level, we'd love to invite you to come experience our work at Soulful Impact. Our goal with everything that we do is to support you in coming more fully alive so that you can create authentic, aligned, and regenerative impact while also deeply enjoying and thriving in your life. If that speaks to you and you'd love to learn more, please reach out. We've got our next Vision Quest program, Power Awakening, lined up for the fall. Program begins in late October 2024, and the quest runs November 15th through 22nd in the beautiful desert mountains of southern Arizona. Learn more and reach out anytime at soulfulimpact.co.